We're here at the CrowdStrike Government Summit with Elia Zaitsev, Chief Technology Officer for CrowdStrike. Elia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start by asking, where do you see the greatest opportunity for the public sector to drive innovation, and how can it alleviate the risk associated with legacy infrastructure?
It's a good question. I think, historically, one of the ways that we've seen the public sector have the biggest impact on innovation is partnering with the private sector. And there's a lot of reasons to do this. Obviously, getting around some of that traditional bureaucracy, the internal and external politics, it can be easier when you're working with those private sector partners. I think one important aspect of doing that correctly, though, is to really let the private sector focus on some of that innovation and let the public sector shape what the outcome should look like, but not necessarily dictate a solution, right? Let those innovators do what they do best and innovate and figure out how to do it.
Next, I'd like to ask, as agencies and public sector organizations modernize infrastructure, how can security parallel and secure this transformation? And what are the potential gaps that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, great question. So I want to touch on that in two ways. I want to talk about a technology aspect to that, but also a human aspect to it. I think on the technology side, one of the most important things that organizations can do as they try to modernize these systems is to make sure they've got full visibility across the network. In many cases, the architecture and the design of these systems, especially these legacy systems, they have a path dependency problem. You can't make giant changes to them. They've been evolved slowly over many, many years. They're layering technology and standards on top. But one thing you can do in many cases is get that comprehensive visibility. And if you work with cloud technologies in particular, that makes it dramatically easier to interact with all of these legacy systems than if you were to try to crack open these networks and expand them internally with a traditional on-premise approach. I think from a human perspective, something that I hate to say it because it's cliche, but it's still true, it's that skills gap, the skills shortage. Once you've got all that visibility in place and you've got the environment instrumented, you need to now do something with all that information. And that can be challenging for a lot of organizations that don't have that expertise in-house. Obviously, the federal government is going to have access to more resources as you start going down the chain to state and local governments, municipal agencies, utilities that maybe are private but are critical infrastructure that's very important to the public sector. You're not going to get that same level of resource and expertise. And one of the best ways to address that is, again, by partnering with both public and private sector organizations and utilizing what's called managed services and basically outsourcing it to a team of experts who can afford and have the expertise and the capabilities to bring all that information together and do things like 24/7 proactive threat hunting with the data that you're bringing in.
Some great points. Well, Elia Zaitsev, thank you so much for joining us here at the CrowdStrike Government Summit.
Thanks for having me.